The AmberMac Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
Welcome to the AmberMac Show. Coming up in today's episode, building a proud Canadian business in the face of Trump's tariffs, preparing your kids for the future of the AI workplace, how wearable tech is reimagining everything from health to fashion, and why governments should probably stay away from cryptocurrency. Hey, Jeff.
Hey, how's it going? It's been a pretty crazy news week out there, eh?
It absolutely has. It has been wild. So let's get right into the news.
News feed.
Well, Jeff, the news has focused a lot on the political landscape, but in 2025, it's fair to say that that means that there still is lots of tech involved.
Yeah, no doubt. So like in your home province, in reaction to the Trump tariffs, in addition to taking American booze off the shelf, Premier Ford has ripped up a contract between Ontario and Elon Musk's Starlink.
This was a $100 million contract, and that was to provide Starlink to communities in Northern Ontario. This makes total sense to me, Jeff, because the reality is, I think even beyond these tariffs, I wouldn't necessarily trust doing a deal right now with one of Elon Musk's companies, but it is also unfortunate for those communities who potentially now won't have access to Starlink.
Absolutely. I think we have to be a little bit smart about looking towards the future and what the decisions we make now that are going to impact that. And I certainly wouldn't be getting any more involved with anything Elon Musk has anything to do with at this point. So yeah, it does sort of suck for those families who aren't going to get the satellite internet there, but it's probably a wise idea. And I mean, especially speaking of Starlink, according to Rolling Stone, employees at the Federal Aviation Administration were recently told to begin finding tens of millions of dollars for a Starlink deal.
This is an unbelievable headline, and this is probably one of the things that I think is the most worrisome in terms of Elon Musk's role in the U.S. government. The fact that, of course, he has a vested interest in so many of these deals, and this is just one really good example. So I think this is something that you're going to talk about a little bit later in the Other Mac segment, but it is fair to say that we're seeing a lot of red flags that look like this.
Yeah, I just don't think it passes the smell test at all. Plus, the FAA actually already has a $2.4 billion contract with Verizon. And so everything is happening so quickly, it's just not clear if that'll go to Musk's company or what will happen, but it all certainly seems pretty fishy.
Okay, so we've talked about ditching Verizon, ditching Starlink, and now we're talking about ditching remote work, at least at Google. Turns out one of Google's co-founders is saying in order to really compete in this AI race right now, he is looking to the employees at Google to work in some cases 60 hours a week or more. What do you think of this?
Yeah, well, on the coming back into work thing, I got to say, I never thought that your average person likely gets as much done at home as they would at the office, and reasonable people can disagree on that. But when you're suggesting that not only do people come back to the office, which is fair, but hey, why don't you also consider working 60 hours a week, 12 hours a day over 5 days? That's pretty rich coming from somebody who, again, is obviously so invested in trying to accomplish something themselves that it's unclear how it's gonna help those workers. But certainly for the billionaire who wants to be the one to make the next big AI breakthrough, I'm sure it makes sense.
Well, I think we should have a discussion, or maybe it's a debate on working from home, because this has been in the headlines over the past few years, and there are various arguments for working from home versus going into the office, and certainly a lot of data support that. This is probably also a great segue to your segment, The Other Mac, where you're going to talk about whether or not government should steer clear of crypto. That's up next.
The Other Mac.
Earlier this month, President Donald Trump, among many other questionable declarations, announced that the United States would establish a strategic cryptocurrency reserve, which understandably caused the 5 specific cryptocurrencies he said would be included to gain significant value. Now, I think there are some very cool technologies involved in cryptocurrency, like blockchain, which is amazing and super useful. But we also know there are downsides. As one example, the annual electricity consumption dedicated to just Bitcoin mining is comparable to the electricity consumption of the entire country of Poland. So it's not good for the environment. Now, I won't go down the rabbit hole of why I think cryptocurrencies aren't a good idea, and certainly not a good idea for governments to get involved with. But I think most of us could agree that an ongoing sentiment that underlies the justification for crypto is that you can't really trust the government, and at the extreme, should society fail, you need alternative currency. And frankly, crypto is a pretty good solution for those things. So now understand that the value of any given cryptocurrency goes up the more people want to buy it. Then it's certainly the case that the people who want you to buy it have invested in that cryptocurrency. And when you buy that cryptocurrency, as we just went over, the value of their cryptocurrency goes up. So they really want you to buy it. And it'd be even better if, say, just pick something out of the air, a large government decided to buy some. And if the selling point is the concern that you can't trust the government and that you need to protect yourself in the event of societal collapse, then we need to recognize that the people who want you to buy cryptocurrencies are also invested in making you feel that the government can't really be trusted and that society is, at best, struggling. Now look around you. Does that seem familiar at all? We have been witnessing some of the most brazen grifts in history in our recent past, and we need to pay much closer attention when the people trying to convince us to do things are the very people who'd profit most from them. Whether that's AI tycoons insisting that we can't afford to have any guardrails, or the crypto for all crowd expecting that you don't really understand how they're profiting off of you, we all need to better educate ourselves on whether the next big thing is valuable to us, valuable to society as a whole, or just to those who make so much off the grift that they can happily survive any consequential misery. So keep your head up out there. I'm the other Mac.
Thanks so much for that, Jeff. Super interesting. And coming up next, we chat about how to prepare your kids for the future of AI at work.
The AmberMac Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
Like most parents, I've spent a lot of time thinking about how to best prepare my kids for what work is becoming in our fast future. And in our next segment, Amber chats with education strategist and speaker Dwayne Matthews about how AI is reshaping learning and more.
AI Spotlight.
Okay, so I'm going to start this off with a question that I got at an event recently. I know you spoke at the same event last year. And the question they asked me is, if you had an unlimited budget, unlimited time, what would you do in terms of ensuring that a school board was ready for this age of AI?
Wow, that's a really big question. And I think it's an interesting one. So what I would do is I would really look at the function of what we're doing. So if we go back at the very beginning, we had a technology called the printed book somewhere around 1871. And people realized that this technology has the ability to transform the world. So if you can imagine the world in 1871, 98% of the people are farmers, soldiers, or enslaved. And they're all working on a farm regardless of those positions. And so can you imagine walking and saying, hey, look, we're gonna take your 5 children that are really strong and working on the farm, your daughter that can probably carry a sack of flour, 200 pounds for about a mile, we're gonna put them into a small room with a blackboard at the front. What's a blackboard? It's this really cool technology. And they're gonna learn how to read and write, and it will transform the world. And 100 years into the future, they will be sending messages, electronic mail messages on beams of light and getting paid about $100,000. What do you think? It would have sounded absolutely crazy, but the function of what we were doing was realizing that the actual power of words will transform time and space. We are now in a reality where we have a number of emerging exponential technologies, and they are traveling at a linear progression. But now that we have artificial intelligence, it's applying exponential growth rate to each one, and they're converging. So that changes everything. it changes the economy, it changes what's possible, it changes our health. We start dabbling in things like longevity. So how do you start to prepare for that? Well, the first thing that I would do is I would go back and I would think about a few different areas to really focus on, a few different principles. And from those principles, then I would create the protocols. So the first principle is really developing the human side. How do you really specialize and develop that human side? Human ingenuity, human intuition, empathy, emotional intelligence, all of those things become really important. The next thing that I would focus on is mastering synergy between AI and humans. HI plus AI equals superpower. How do we put those things together, and how do we spend a lot of time getting students accustomed to the speed and the agility? Which leads me to the third thing, which would really be about resilience, mental and physical resilience. Currently in schools, we spend about 6 hours sitting, and it doesn't leave us physically resilient. And that was because of the limitation of the technology before. The printed book, we had to sit to read, right? But now that we don't necessarily have to sit to do everything, how would we change that mental resilience piece? The next would be future focused. And then the other would really be an entrepreneurial mindset, which is really thinking about what are the opportunities? And last, a really big focus on ethics. One of the non-obvious things about technology is that it provides us with an opportunity to expand our sense of humanity. And it always has done that. And we have a really big opportunity to expand, and we're going to need ethics to guide us.
Well, that is a phenomenal plan. I wish I had that answer when I was on stage, because I'm pretty sure I got fired from this hypothetical job very quickly. When you think about all of those things pieced together, you mentioned 5 or 6 different strategies. What is the limitation in terms of why we aren't seeing change to adopt some of those ideas? Because I think it is fair to say that people are aware of the changes that need to happen in education insofar as adapting to an AI world, but we're really slow to actually see any of those changes come into effect. What's happening there? You've been a teacher in the past, you've been a strategist in the education sector. Why are we not seeing change at the rate that we need to see it?
So in many industries, you have an incumbent. And once an incumbent is formed, it's usually an innovation or a disruptive innovation model that's created. But once it becomes an incumbent, all the subsequent innovations are incremental and tactical, because stability becomes really important. And that's ingrained over 200 years. You have that kind of stability in the education system. You're going to find it in larger industries. It might be print media. It might be, mobile. There's a mobile company in Canada that was disrupted. And so once you have that, you find that the disruptive models come from the edges. They typically come where people are excluded, or they feel that they're behind a gate and they can't navigate around that gate. The actual incumbent itself, it's very, very difficult for an incumbent to disrupt itself, because it typically will have to cannibalize itself. There is a way to do it, and few companies have been very successful, a few organizations have been very successful, but it's very difficult to do that because of stability. And once we're dealing with education, we're also dealing with our children. And so we don't want to have reckless experiments left and right. We may see some experiments that are reckless and it runs into problems down the road. So we really want to think about, can we be sure? Now, I believe that there is a model that will allow for sort of experimentation on that model and an expansion of the change. I think there's a way to do it, and I'm pretty excited about that possibility. But right now, how the system has been responding is understandable and expected.
when you think about AI and introducing AI into a classroom, one of the things that strikes me as sort of a difficult path right now is the reality, and we've seen this, I know in Florida, for example, there have been news headlines over the past few days that students' scores in some of the basics like math and reading, they have really fallen, especially out of the COVID-19 pandemic. So I'm curious what you think about how do you continue to teach the basics, but also teach in this fast future when it comes to AI, because it just feels to me like, does something have to give, or can you do those two things together?
Sure. So I think you can be very intentional. I think the problem is the idea of a false binary, thinking one or the other, and spending a significant amount of time having debates around that. ChatGPT came out in 2022, and there's still long conversations about essays and AI detectors, which were the first conversations that came out in 2022. We're in 2025, and we're having the same conversations, and we're fastly approaching strong AI, regardless of whether people believe in AGI or not, artificial general intelligence or anything else. We are fastly approaching strong AI, and we're still having the conversation. So I think what happens is we start to think about the model. The technology itself is disruptive, but that's not where the disruption is. When you find disruption is when you have a disruptive innovation model. And so how do you create the model? I'll give you an example. I have a daughter, and my daughter's quite young. And so we have an AI tutor that helps her with math. It's not an either or proposition. It's not she's going to the AI tutor and never going to paper and pencil. We have paper and pencil books. We have bonding time where she spends with her parents. It really is about finding the right model to give the right balance. And if we do that right, we can keep students in what's called a zone of proximal development, which is the right amount of challenge and the right amount of confidence or lack of challenge, having that balance and being able to move students along in that model. We find that we'll probably meet with a lot of success. The challenge, I don't think, is the AI or the students. The challenge is the conversation that we're having while time keeps on passing. And we haven't focused on future preparedness of these students so much as how do we deal with this new stuff.
I'm always amazed that we are spending so much time on AI detection tools, just to pick out one of the things you just mentioned. Although I'm sure that's important at some level, I think the reality is that every CEO, every leader in business, I certainly see all of them using AI, whether they're using ChatGPT to write an email or they're using other AI tools to be more productive. It is sort of bizarre to me that we assume that kids will enter a workforce of tomorrow that isn't AI focused, when we know that even today, all of the business leaders are using AI already. What do you think of that reality in terms of the fact that when we talk about preparedness, we really do have a long way to go?
Well, I mean, I'm super happy that you even mentioned CEO. One of the things that I can remember when I was a child was every adult asking me, teacher, parent, what are you going to do when you grow up? What do you want to be? And what they were really looking for was an answer that was some kind of profession. So a police officer, a teacher, a lawyer, a doctor. And I would pick one at random. I mean, I think I've told a few people how I became a teacher. I was standing in line at the registrar's office at university, very confused about what I was going to do. And my ex-girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, was somebody that I really wanted to talk to again. And she just said, what are you doing after school? I said, I don't know. She says, I'm going into education. Here's one of the forms. That's how I became a teacher. It wasn't a deep-seated purpose that I found when I was 8 and thought, gosh, one thing I'm going to do. And I happen to like it and love it. And so I think what changes today is that today, our kids are not going to be employees. They're going to be CEOs of Me Inc. And Me Inc., as a CEO, they're going to have the ability to hire 3 or 4 absolutely brilliant AI agents, and their job is going to be strategy, discernment, and direction and creativity with those agents. What would I have them do as a CEO? So instead of thinking about, how do we prepare them to be a really good employee, we have to start thinking about how do we prepare them to be a really good CEO of Me Inc. Ethics, philosophy, influence, strategy, mental models, discipline. All these things become extremely important. And what do you do with all the cognitive surplus? I haven't met a CEO that does not read massive amounts of books. A lot of CEOs are very fit. How do they think about that extra surplus that they have when all of their staff is moving? This is the reality that our students face today.
So we've talked a little bit about what leaders in education should do. We've talked about what teachers should do. They are also leaders. Let's talk a little bit about what parents should do, because this is probably also one of the top questions that I get asked all the time is, what should I do as a parent to prepare my child for the workforce of tomorrow when it comes to AI? I certainly have lots of advice that I like to give parents, but one of the things I do see them struggle with is the fact that they put technology all into one bucket of bad. And that means, social media, AI tools, screen time. They think it's all just a bad thing. What is your opinion on that?
So the first thing that I would tell them to do is to reframe it. There's I forget the leader's name, but he talks about human technologicus, and talks about the fact that everything that we do is technology related, right? The printed book, many people forget, is 600-year-old technology. Writing is technology and innovation. Writing on paper is technology and innovation. The chairs that we're sitting on, and it allows us to do things that, we wouldn't be able to do if we were running around, in the jungles trying to catch things. And so I think it's really important that we recognize that one fact, and recognize that all of that technology falls into the background because we've created models that allow them to feel very natural. So we're going to have to create models that allow us to feel very natural about the convergence. AI is one of the really amazing things, but we have things like synthetic biology and all of these things that will start to tinker with longevity and how long we live. And so I think that would be the first thing, would be to think a little bit differently about the technology, and then think about the application as being right or wrong. And how do you do that? Not in terms of, how do you feel about it morally, but in terms of what is it that you would like to accomplish at the end. So for me, I have 2 children, and I think about this just about every night. And so my role as a parent is future preparedness. My role is to prepare them to meet the future. And so in the past, I would outsource some of that completely to school, right? I would think I need to give you lunch, and you need to go there and listen to the teacher. And that would be enough. So today I think, we have to start doing a few things extra. So one, the same advice, AI mastery of AI synergy. How do we start working on projects together? I would start to challenge my students or my children to work on projects. Create a website, right? What would be really hard that you couldn't do that you might be able to do, right? And can you go figure that out? The second is really to focus on how they ask questions, which is really important. We typically, as adults, we ask questions of children. How was your day today? What do you feel? As opposed to helping them to think about what questions do you have and how do you create those questions. One of the things that we do with my daughter every night, we have 5 or 6 questions that we ask to Perplexity. And she says, explain it to me like I'm a 7-year-old. And she puts it in voice mode, and she will do that. But every night, and what we want her to start really focusing us on is all of the questions that you have, how can you ask those? If you wanted to get daddy to say more, could you change the way that you ask the question? So now she's very, very thoughtful about, what is and how might. right? And she'll ask me how might it work if I were to use your iPad on the weekend, right? And so I think that's really important. And then the other piece is really physical and mental resilience. The ability to shift very quickly is going to be very, very important. The ability to look at a situation, see opportunities, see something changing, and respond to that is going to start to get very important. And then the last, I would say, is to be optimistic about what you can co-create with all of these new things. As the adults of yesterday, we naturally panic about what's coming, but they have the ability to think, if I were to make this world a better place, what would I do if I had all these tools at my disposal? They should spend a significant amount of time doing that. We've done a pretty decent job so far, but we could do better. And I think they're going to do much better than we are.
As always, fantastic advice for people who are watching or listening. Where is the best place for them to go to follow you online?
So the very best place is LinkedIn. Dwayne Matthews, OCT at LinkedIn. The second best place is I'm starting a community, and that community is going to start on Substack. So Dwayne Matthews at Substack, and the community is really about how will I prepare my students, my children, for the future. And so I spent a lot of time, I spent the last year sort of writing a lot of this stuff down, and I thought this would be great to share with people. My son will be 25 in 2035, and my daughter will be 25 in 2043. So I've thought about what might the world look like, and if it's kind of fuzzy, how would I help them to get there? And so I'm going to start that at that community on Substack. But those are the two best places to find me. And if you're just looking for some random pictures, Instagram.
Thanks, Dwayne, and thanks, Amber. Up next, we talk about how wearables are making a comeback in our clothing.
You're listening to the AmberMac Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
The fashion industry is one of the world's biggest polluters, but thankfully, technology can help. Here's Amber's conversation with Amanda Cosco about how new tech is reshaping fashion, health, and more.
Talking Tech.
We have known each other for a very long time, but for people who have never heard of you or met you, tell us a little bit about your background and what you do.
Yeah, so I'm Amanda Cosco, and I'm the founder of Electric Runway. So Electric Runway is dedicated to covering how emerging technologies are transforming the $3 trillion fashion industry around the world. I originally got into looking at fashion technology through the perspective of wearables and technology on the body, and I remember when we talked the first time, I was showing you some cool new wearables back in 2015 when that was the emerging trend. And then it's really continued on to look at spatial computing and Web3 and now how AI is impacting the fashion industry. So it's kind of like this thread that I started pulling back in 2015, and I never kind of ran out of a string to pull because there's just so many interesting things at this intersection.
Well, first of all, I can't believe that was in 2015 when we were talking about wearables, but that does make sense. So 10 years later, we have come a long way when it comes to fashion tech. Wearables have come a long way. You have a new book coming out. So I wanted to ask why a book and what is the focus of the book?
Right. So I think a book really gives me an opportunity to set down what I've been doing for the last 10 years in paper, in paper format. You know, we work a lot in multimedia with Electric Runway, so podcasts, videos, like a YouTube channel. And I feel like a book and long form in general just really gave me the opportunity to tell stories and take readers in a more immersive way. I'm hoping people still read books, but it gives me the chance to bring the reader along for a longer ride.
Well, I was looking at some of the chapters. I know the book is coming out in the fall, but one of the chapters I thought was really interesting was the focus on AI, because I think when people think about the fashion industry and technology, they may not realize that AI is actually playing a role as well. So let's start there, especially since this year is such a big year on the AI front.
Yeah, absolutely. And so artificial intelligence has really been changing the fashion industry behind the scenes for a really long time. So if you're shopping on Amazon and you notice the algorithm recommending you this product because you looked at that product, or on an e-commerce website, that's AI at work. It's just not as obvious or sexy as, artificially generated models and things like that. But we're now starting to see more kind of consumer-facing applications of AI for fashion design and merchandising that are really democratizing our access to fashion generation tools. So of course, when you talk about generative AI, which has come out recently with this whole, ChatGPT and DeepSeek, we're now starting to see designers who don't have any technical training who are bringing collections to life using programs like Midjourney to bring designs to life. And now on the one hand, if you have a fashion degree and technical training, you might balk at this idea. You might say like, hey, that's not fair. But on the other hand, fashion design is an industry that is very expensive to get into, and it's not available for everybody. And so it's kind of like you can see it both ways. You can see it as it's bad for the technical designers, but it's also democratizing access to creative tools. And I think that with every wave of technology that we've seen, starting with the smartphone and moving all the way up until AI, what we've seen is this democratization of access. And so more people are, becoming photographers because of the smartphone camera. More people are becoming fashion designers because of these AI generative tools. So it's really something that's going to disrupt this industry.
What do you think the smartphone has done, and I would include sort of influencers along that path, in terms of having an effect on the type of fashion that we see? Like, is it driven by the influencers, or is the fashion driving things? Like, it probably has changed a little bit when you talk about it.
It's changed a lot. So it used to be a lot more top down. Like, I don't know if you remember the movie The Devil Wears Prada, but there's that scene where Meryl Streep is talking about how that cerulean jumper ended up on the assistant Andy Sachs, and she's talking about how, like, you think you're making an independent fashion decision, but actually you're wearing a sweater that was chosen by the very people in this room. And she describes how things would go from, one designer to a next, and then there was this kind of trickle down effect when it came to the spread of trends. That's really not true anymore. Things are more bottom up, and they come from everywhere. And so the fashion industry has kind of been grappling with this conundrum of, do we innovate for the sake of creativity and innovation, or do we try and feed the algorithm? And I think that when you think about personal style as well, that's something that's changed a lot over the years. Like, personal style used to maybe embody your ethics or your political stance. And now it seems that style is just something that you try on like a costume, and fast fashion has made it so easy to try on these styles like a costume, which is it's good in some ways, because then you can try on these different identities and have the cost to entry not be so high. But it's also, got a shady underbelly to it, in the sense that there's a lot of waste that goes in with fast fashion. And are people really truly authentic in these identities, or are they just kind of cosplaying these different characters?
I'm glad you brought up fast fashion, because I think when people think about the fashion industry, there are a lot of legitimate concerns about sustainability, for example. I'm curious if you've seen any new technologies that have actually helped on the sustainability side, or on ensuring that the entire ecosystem is just a little bit more responsible. Can technology play a role there?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So chapter 3 is on automation, and it looks at how automation technologies change the fashion industry from, a kind of mom and pop industry. Like, you would go down the street and get your suit or your dress made from the local tailor, right? That changed when these big manufacturing technologies came in with the ability to mass manufacture things, and that caused offshoring, where people sent their labor and their manufacturing to other countries. And that changed the landscape of places like New York and Toronto, which used to be manufacturing hubs, right? Like, my grandparents worked in the Tip Top Tailor building. That's where they met, actually, in the Tip Top Tailor building, when they were, he was a tailor and she was a seamstress, right? So it's changed the landscape of our cities. And that's kind of how things have been done for the last 100 years, right? These economies of scale, these mass manufacturing facilities. Now there's more of this conversation of, hey, wait a minute, maybe we should be manufacturing closer to the consumer. What can we do to manufacture close to the consumer? And so there's this trend of micro factories, which are smaller machines hosted in facilities, the size of your studio, that can make limited run collections for designers, and they can make them on demand. So rather than producing hundreds of thousands of pieces and hoping that they sell and ending up with so much waste, you can just produce for your customers that have already maybe pre-purchased something. One company I like to talk about is called Unspun, and they are this company that combines the 3D scanner on your iPhone, so the LiDAR scanner, to get your measurements, and then they custom manufacture something for you in one of their micro factories on their own proprietary manufacturing machines. And that way you're getting a one-off. You're getting something that is designed specifically for you. It's not something that everyone can adopt right now, but it's the same cost as if you were to go buy a pair of pants, let's say, in the shops. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, it's, again, like democratizing access to more custom technology that used to be a lot more to produce that way.
It also makes me think, and I think it's fair to say that when we talk about the tariff wars, by the time people watch or see this, who knows where we'll be at. But generally speaking, it does feel a little bit like there is this movement of buying local. And I think we're going to see that more and more. And I would guess that technology will play a role there as well in terms of giving people access to, make clothing locally in their own communities.
Yeah, I think it's really important. And I think that the trouble with the supply chain with the way it is now is that it's so globalized, and designers and consumers are so disassociated from the actual people making their clothes. And it's very difficult to have transparency in the supply chain. And so when you manufacture locally, you can have more oversight over it. You can have more control over it. I think the world since the pandemic has also noticed the volatility of global supply chains. And so when you're counting on your cotton coming from here and then your manufacturing facility from there, there's, one thing that goes wrong can disrupt the whole thing. And so if you're relying more on local manufacturers, then yes, you're supporting your local economy and you have that transparency, and you're not going to get called out in some scandal that happens when a factory collapses somewhere.
What about individuals using technology to make their own clothing? And I'm thinking of my son, who is a teenager, and I took him to the Taylor Swift concert. Lucky kid, I might add, but he actually designed his own outfit. So he used a Cricut machine to actually create his own design with these sparkly snakes all over his t-shirt and black pants. And he's very into actually making his own clothing.
Yeah.
Are you seeing this trend more and more?
Yeah, we've been seeing it for the last 5-6 years, mass customization and personalization, right? So this idea of there's a template of something and then people can design their own, make it their own. H&M actually did this, I think it was called H&M Studio, where they would manufacture on demand your own custom design, right? So this idea of brands giving the consumers the tools to make their own, kind of put their own stamp on things, that's definitely becoming the new way. And I think it's also good for our association with our clothing and how much we value our clothing, because I think you're less likely to just throw away something that you spent a lot of time and care thinking about. It's changing our relationship with our clothing. So
like I said off the top of the interview, I've known you for a really long time. We have worked together, and as two women in the tech world, although sort of in different spaces, I think it's fair to say that oftentimes, you have a technology that you're most excited about. For me, it might be climate tech, like the ability to actually help people save money and do good for the planet. I think that space is really exciting. I don't get to talk about it enough, but I'm optimistic about it. What are you most excited about?
Yeah, so chapter 7 talks about biotechnology. And when I say biotechnology, I mean biomaterials and different ways of manufacturing things. For example, there's a company out in New Jersey called Modern Meadow, and they manufacture an Ella biomaterial that is made out of plants, essentially. Or let me think about that for a second. It's not made out of animals. It's a leather that is just as durable as a cow's hide, but it doesn't involve any animals. And so you see this a lot in the industry now, where they're kind of combining biology and what's available in nature plus science to make new types of materials. And they're able to do it. The problem with this technology a couple of years ago was like, yeah, they could do it, but it costs 10 times more and they can't achieve the scale. We're actually seeing companies like Modern Meadow that can achieve the same scale that companies like Tory Burch need. And they have the same properties, like the durability that you'd expect from leather, right? Because a lot of companies, they went to this like PU leather, which is essentially like,
is that pleather?
It's pleather. Yeah, it's pleather. It's like a very, you know, if you get something pleather, you'll realize like it doesn't breathe, it smells, right? So it's essentially fossil fuels, right? And the kind of conversation was, well, yes, if you get something leather, you might have harmed animals in the making of it, and there's fossil fuels that go into the manufacturing of it, but that piece will last, you know, 3 generations of wearers, versus something that's pleather. Okay, it doesn't have any animals in it, but it's got all types of fossil fuels in it, and it's going to take 300 years to biodegrade once you put it in the ground. So there was kind of this trade-off that you had to consider when you were purchasing something like a leather or a pleather. Now we have these new innovative materials that are combining science and biology to come up with some really cool stuff.
I think that is super exciting. I think, again, there's an intersection I think we see between the two of us in terms of really sustainable fabrics and fashion, and it's very, very exciting. Last question I want to ask you is kind of where you and I started in terms of those early days in tech, where I would turn to you and ask you, like, what's happening in wearables? As much as we're talking about fashion and clothing, there's still lots of cool stuff when it comes to wearables. What are you seeing in this space in 2025?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that wearables and technology on the body was an interesting time. And a lot of the stuff that was on the runway was stuff that was announcing itself as technology. So you had like light up dresses and, you know, these different gadgets that were like very obviously technology. We're now seeing technology fade a little bit more into the background, and we have more subtle applications like in supply chain management. So I think that wearable technology needed to be there to kind of announce itself as there. But now with the rise of spatial computing, we have the Apple Vision Pro, we have new glasses and things like that that are bringing wearables back into the conversation. And I think that the argument for a design approach is still very much needed. So there's still that need for the fashion industry's input. But we're seeing wearables kind of make a comeback in a new way. And I don't know exactly where it's going to land, but it's not necessarily stuff that's like blinking Burning Man costumes anymore. It's stuff that's a little bit more subtle and in the background.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's exciting. And as much as people want to dismiss some of these wearables like smart glasses, I think you're exactly right. Like, the technology is there, and once they sort of have those designers come in and make it more aesthetically pleasing, I think it will be a lot more user-friendly for the average person. Before we wrap up, I just want to talk a little bit about you and your work and your book. So tell me a little bit about the book, when it's coming out, the audience for the book, and what people can get out from reading it.
Yeah, so the book is literally called Electric Runway, which is the same name as my brand. It's now, my brand has been turned into a book. And it's coming out September 2025. And it's meant for people who are fashion curious, tech curious, but really those who are passionate about the intersection of design and innovation. So you don't have to be necessarily versed in the fashion industry or versed in the tech industry in order to understand or in order to follow along. But if you're interested in that intersection, then I'm sure you'll get something out of it. I really did write it with fashion students in mind, though, because I did notice that there was a gap in the fashion education system where there wasn't anything that kind of covered technology in an all-encompassing way. And it's not a technical book. It's not like this is how you make wearable technology, or this is, you know, how you generate your own AI in fashion. It's told from the first-hand perspective of me and my adventures throughout the world. So the first chapter on the smartphone starts in Nigeria. And when I was there, I was looking at the impact of the smartphone. So it's told through a global perspective, but also through my personal story of going on these different adventures and covering fashion technology. And then it extrapolates from there and obviously has research and footnotes and everything. So it tries to be a good mix of both storytelling and the research that you'd expect from journalism.
Well, I can't wait to read it. I know it's available for pre-order now.
Yeah.
Until people actually get their hands on the book, where should they go to follow you and all your great work?
Yeah, so you can go to electricrunway.com. I have a Substack that I launched not too long ago, and that's the best way to kind of tap into the Electric Runway universe.
Well, listen, thank you so much for sitting down with me. It is great to see you again, and I would love it if you would come back on the show, especially as your book comes out.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, Amber.
Thanks, Amber and Amanda. In our final interview this episode, Amber speaks with Sierra about Made in Canada businesses during a time of historic Canadian pride.
Makers.
Joining me now is Adam Eisner, Vice President .ca and Registry Services at Sierra, who's going to talk more about what we're seeing in terms of historic Canadian pride at this time. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me. Hi there.
First of all, I wanted to ask what Sierra is doing right now to support small businesses in Canada.
So we do lots of things to help small businesses in Canada. First and foremost, probably job one is making sure the .ca domain is safe, stable, and secure for all Canadians, including Canadian small businesses. We provide cybersecurity services and toolkits to make sure Canadian businesses are safe and protected. We promote .ca businesses, which is now more important than ever through what we call .ca success stories, and we publish a lot of those at ownyoursuccess.ca. And we have a service called Canadian Shield that's become quite popular recently that aims to protect individuals while they're online. So lots of different ways that we try to support Canadian businesses.
You know, it's interesting. I was reading a little bit and learning more about Sierra as we've worked together over the years, and learned that Canadians are 4 times more likely to click on a .ca domain when searching online. Why do you think it is that .ca is so trusted, and why is that especially important right now?
It's really interesting. I think CA has become really recognized in Canada in recent years. There are now like more than 3.4 million .cas on the internet. And so any Canadian that shops online regularly is likely going to interact with a .ca domain name pretty frequently. And when you add to the fact that when we shop at a .ca website, we're typically getting a Canadian experience with currency and shipping and even product aimed at Canadians, it's really become a trusted and established way to know that you're dealing with an online business who is serving Canadians specifically, and know that it's a site and a business that has ties to Canada, as a .ca can only be registered by individuals and organizations that have a link to Canada. And so all of this has really become more important recently. More now than ever, we're hearing from Canadians that they want to support Canadian businesses. And while we've always done that at Sierra, we're really now doubling down on amplifying the fact that CA is by Canadians. It's for Canadians, and we even invest sales from .ca domain names back into the Canadian internet community. So a portion of our sales goes back to grants to support communities, projects, and policies that make Canada's internet better for everybody. So buying a CA really has an impact in a number of ways that, especially recently, have become more important.
One thing that I've learned over the years in terms of talking about tech is never to assume that people know how to launch anything, whether it's a website or getting a domain name. So I would love to hear how simple this is for business owners. If someone listening right now wants to set up a .ca domain and a custom .ca email, how do they go about doing that?
It's super easy to set up a .ca domain and a custom .ca email. Anyone can visit yourcustomemail.ca and find the name they want and the domain provider. You know, we call them registrars. That's a perfect match for their business, for their name, personal name, project, whatever they'd like to do. And each registrar there has customized guides for setting up a custom domain name and email. So anybody that purchases a domain and email as part of a bundle can literally be sending emails from a new custom brand, a new custom domain name, literally within minutes.
When we look at both the .ca domain and the custom email, I would love to just hear a bit more about how this makes things more affordable for businesses to build an online presence, and email is absolutely part of that.
100%. The bundle itself means you don't have to purchase a domain name and email separately, which is often the case, which is a real pain. So this allows you to set up both elements of a new brand right away. And having something like a custom email address instead of something like a gmail.com address really adds immediate credibility to a business's brand online. The business appears much more professional right away. It gives much more credibility to a business in the eyes of a customer. I think we can all think of cases where we've seen a business using a Gmail email address or a URL from a free website service that made us go, and perhaps second guess whether we wanted to, transact or do business with that website.
Last question for you. I know you touched on this a little bit, and we've had you on talking about this in the past, but we know that, like you said, Canadians are choosing to buy from local businesses to support the country, especially right now. What trends are you noticing around this shift?
We've definitely seen an increased interest from Canadians wanting to support Canadian businesses, and that's really manifesting itself on every element that we see inside of our online presence and website. Like, for example, we provide a number of guides on how to shop and buy Canadian and identify Canadian businesses. Those have now become the number one pieces of content on our website and become incredibly popular. And similarly, queries to our site have exploded for how to shop Canadian, how to buy Canadian. It's become really clear over the past few weeks that what's important to Canadians online has really shifted in ways that we haven't seen before. And so we're trying to meet that need by providing as much information and guidance as possible around great businesses across Canada that are doing fantastic things on the internet. And we're highlighting those all over our website at cira.ca.
Well, listen, thank you so much for joining me once again and breaking this all down for Canadian small businesses. We know we have many people listening who are entrepreneurs, so really appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
Well, that was a packed show. So that wraps it up for our 4th episode, but I'm looking forward to talking about the race to Mars and other stuff in upcoming shows. And Amber, I believe you've got an interview with the wonderful Guy Kawasaki, one of Apple's earliest marketing team members, now a best-selling author, podcaster, and speaker.
Guy is always so much fun to talk to. Let's have a sneak peek. But like you, I do appreciate that it's not owned by one of these big tech billionaires who's trying to destroy democracy. I think that's good news. And I don't want to blame you for those guys, but you did start in Silicon Valley, and I feel like, what happened, Guy? Like, how did this all happen? Any insight into that?
I think they weren't breastfed as kids or something. I had, for the life of me, Amber, I do not know what happened. I mean, Silicon Valley, it wasn't always kumbaya and, we're all sitting around wearing our Birkenstocks and drinking white wine and smoking marijuana. But really, like if you look back at Hewlett and Packard didn't want to become billionaires so that they can run the US government. I have decided, Amber, that I am going to limit my net worth to $999 million. I don't want to take a chance becoming a billionaire and losing my mind, but I'm not exactly close to that number, so I am not. You don't need to worry.
Guy is so much fun. Thank you so much for joining us today, and please find us on social media and let us know what you'd like to hear on upcoming shows. For more information, you can always visit theambermacshow.com.
Thanks for tuning in.
You're listening to the AmberMac Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.